you don't have to stay in something because it's not bad enough. He's coming to me energetically and basically saying, I want what's best for you. And we're staying on this topic because I need you to start to open your mind to the fact that this isn't good for you. One of the biggest dilemmas that I've been facing every single day this week has been all centered around, having really big feelings about a certain topic, but not really having a strategy for how to move through those feelings, but like people around me can sense it. And so everything internally for me is half-baked, half-baked feelings, half-baked strategy for dealing with the feelings. And so it's been an interesting kind of dynamic to have to work through. And I think this is where I start getting a lot of questions from people around me of like, are you okay? When I'm holding these really big feelings, I have a hard time figuring out how to talk about it. If I know that I'm not okay, and somebody asks me if I'm okay, I struggle to figure out like how to exactly answer the question. Like I said, especially if those feelings and the strategy for coping with the feelings and moving beyond it is all half-baked. And I had a friend recently ask me, are you okay? And they did it in such a kind and supportive way. And it just felt so nourishing. And I mean, we've had several conversations about this exact topic of like, Allie, are you okay? And each time I leave the conversation feeling so supported and nourished. And that's what I want to dissect today, because I think, even for you listening, like if you're just if you're like me and trying to figure out how to answer a question of are you okay, and how to form your thoughts around it, and how to take half-baked feelings to baked feelings and like able to speak about them, I hope this can provide you a little bit of inspiration and make you feel like you're not alone. And also perhaps you're on the flip side of that. And I've certainly been on this side too, where it's like you're the friend who's witnessing another friend and you can sense that something's off. You know that they're not okay. And I think it's sometimes difficult to figure out how to bring that up and how to ask them if they're okay and how you can support them. And so I think why I want to dissect exactly what my friend did today is because I think there's something that all of us can learn from how he approached it. And so let me just preface this all by saying, like, it's no secret that I struggle with burnout. Like, I recently did an episode on like how I took an 18-month work break to recover from burnout before returning to work. And, burnout is something that I continue to struggle with. Going into that stage of burnout where it's like, okay, I have to stop work altogether. I think I had it in my mind that it's like, okay, well, this is a one-time thing. I'm going to course correct now and then not have to worry about it in the future. But I think what's been coming up for me lately is like, no, this is still very much a thing that I have to keep a pulse on. And I have to stop and think about why this pattern is sort of recreating itself in the burnout, because it was not like a one-time thing. And so I continuously need to keep a pulse on it. And so that really like sets the frame for kind of why my friend was asking me if I was okay. And, historically, when someone has asked me if I'm okay, I have like an internal panic. And then I respond with like, oh, it's fine. Oh, don't worry about me. Oh, and that all stems from, I think, part of it's like being the eldest daughter and growing up and feeling like, oh, I can't have anyone worry about me. I can't show weakness. I can't have feelings to a certain extent. And so my initial reaction to the kind of question of, are you okay, is really difficult for me to have an immediate, honest response to. Like, I have to pause and I have to think about it and I have to process it. And I have to get myself to a place where I feel like I can respond with the truth. And, you know, in many cases that's helpful. Like in career, you know, if I'm in a meeting and I need to be cool, calm, and collected, and there's all these emotions flying around and all these people are doing, you know, kind of off the handle things, or some people are, you know, there's just like all sorts of personalities in a meeting, in a work environment, in career in general. And I think that's where, you know, being cool, calm, and collected really benefits me. But when it's like somebody I'm close to and a friend asking me if I'm okay, and if it has to do with me personally as a human being in my life, that's where I'm continuously working towards responding with the truth and letting my guard down. And that's precisely the everyday dilemma I've been facing this week, of just how to really get honest about, am I okay? And, you know, that's part of that is like, first, let me ask myself internally, like an internal question to myself, am I okay? Am I burnt out again? Am I teetering on the edge of burnout? What about this is feeling like burnout? And sensations of burnout really show up in my physical body, in my mind as well. And, you know, I'll just say what it is for me. And of course, like, I want to give my experience as a way for you to start thinking about what this might be in your life. Like, what's your version of this? And so, you know, for me, burnout, I definitely feel it in my physical body. And it's like stomach aches, it's sometimes nausea, it's irregular heartbeat, it's pain in my chest, it's anxiety attacks, it's acne, and it's also sudden exhaustion. So like, I'll be going about my day doing things that light me up, and I'll be getting energized by doing those things, and then I'll sit down to do the thing that I'm feeling burnt out in, and I'll feel an immediate exhaustion. And it's almost just like like a plug has been pulled out of my body, and it's like the energy source is just gone. And that's really been something that I've been feeling this week. And, you know, I mentioned acne being a sign of burnout for me. And, you know, I think it's as a result of anxiety around knowing that I'm in a space that I shouldn't be in, or knowing that I have all these feelings about a topic and I need to get myself out of this topic or this situation. And I haven't gotten myself out of the situation yet, or onto the other side of feeling those feelings. And so I just feel a lot of anxiety around the thing in general. And so that just creates a very fertile ground for acne. You know, at the end of last week, going into this week, I had like breakouts on my face for the first time in like 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years. Like ever since I started doing my acne treatment boot camp, I had to schedule an emergency esthetician appointment to like get my breakouts extracted, because I'm like, what's going on? You know, we've cleared my skin, and the fact that breakouts were coming again, what I'm realizing is all just a signal to me that I need to start moving. I like to think about things in the context of like the universe and like, what is the universe trying to tell me? And if there was one thing that could get my attention, it's acne. Like because I've done so much work on clearing my skin and put so much just like healing work and time and energy into making sure that this is a lasting change sort of thing where I have clear skin. Anytime a breakout comes now, it's like, whoa, stop everything, reevaluate everything, and taking it seriously and not just kind of rolling over and being like, oh my God, like my face is breaking out again. And what am I going to do? Like there is no option to spiral down that path. And so really, I feel like all of this is just signaling to me, like, wake up. That really started to spark internal questions for me even more of like, am I burnt out? And, you know, why am I burnt out? And what's the path that's going to not lead to burnout? It's interesting because I've been having these like internal feelings and I haven't been sharing them with anyone, but it's so interesting about how like certain people in my life just know something's off. I'm just going to be super honest here. Like the whole topic of burnout, yes, for me, I think it has shown up in different areas of my life in different ways, but for me, where it really shows up in is career. And so I'm just going to come out and straight up say, like, that's what this example is about. I may not give extreme details on the matter because, again, like, my strategy for moving through this is a little bit half-baked still. But I think, you know, for the purposes of telling the story, it could be helpful. So as I'm telling this story, I may leave out some details. It's just because there's still certain things that I'm working on and I'm not ready to share yet. So this story will absolutely unfold as time goes on. But my friend called me one day and pretty much staged an intervention and was like, look, I know the dynamic that you're in. I see it. I've experienced it. I've since been away from that dynamic. But I recently got pulled back into the dynamic and I have a glimpse of what it's like. He was like, I was feeling all the same feelings that I once felt when I was in that dynamic that you're in. And as he was going on in the conversation, he was like, look, I can now, because I've been away from this dynamic that you're in, I can now compare it to the actual dynamic that he's in. So his current state of being, he can compare to the state of being that he was once in. And what he was saying to me was like, as soon as I had to revert back to that state of being that he was in, that he used to be in, he's like, I immediately felt stressed. Everything felt off. I had a hard time like calming myself down afterwards. Like he was like, it took me a while to come off of that. And he was like, and I'm wondering how you of all people are in this dynamic. And, you know, like I said, like the people in my life know that I struggle with burnout. And so he was coming to me from a place of like, you're in a dynamic that is causing so much stress. And he was like, if it's causing stress for me, I know it's causing stress for you. Like you're somebody who is very prone to stress, like feeling stressed and so much so that you then get burnt out. And so he was like, I know that this is tough for you. And like, do you agree, basically? It initially caught me off guard because he was so like it was such an intervention. It felt a lot like an intervention at the time, but I initially responded with like my default, which was like, oh, it's fine. Like, don't worry about me. Like it's not as bad as before. And you know, I'm fine. Nothing's wrong. And he just responded with, no, but do you understand? Like, do you understand that you can't be orienting yourself around something that's like, oh, not as bad as before. Like, you know that there's something that is just straight up good out there. Like, there's a dynamic that is good, that is nourishing. You don't have to stay in something because it's good enough. Or, said differently, you don't have to stay in something because it's not bad enough. As he continued to entertain this topic and like sink into this topic and really kind of think out loud and share his thoughts out loud with me, I started to bring my guard down. It's like, okay, let me really listen to what he has to say, because I think for me in my life and what I've noticed is like, I think this is true for everyone. People around us are our teachers. So they're oftentimes just mirroring back what we truly know about ourselves that maybe we haven't admitted to ourselves, or maybe we have. Like, he was mirroring back to me all the things that I had been thinking about, but not necessarily been ready to talk about. And so, as he continued entertaining this conversation, and he's like, we're not leaving this topic until I know that you understand that you need to make a change here. I just started to relax my shoulders, sink back, open my ears, really yes, I was listening before, but I really started to take in what he was saying. And I started to explore with him of like, okay, maybe this is not good for me. And maybe it's okay to admit that. And maybe it's okay to know that you can find a different option or a different situation. And what I loved about that conversation was he was coming to me really as a witness to like what I'm going through. And he led with how he felt in that dynamic to kind of lay the groundwork and lay the context of like, hey, this is what I'm feeling. Like, I can only imagine what you might be feeling just based on what I know about you. And it was like he was sharing first. And so then I felt like I could share my honest thoughts on the matter. And, the other thing that I really appreciated about that was it was absolutely this vibe and this energy of like, no, we're staying on this topic. We will talk about every single angle that has to do with this topic, because I need you to start to open your mind to the fact that this isn't good for you. And I think that was such a loving thing to do. And I remember, leaving that conversation and thinking like, wow, I didn't fully think about it in the way that he had thought about it. And I didn't fully think about it in the way that we had talked about before. And I think that was also such a wonderful part of that conversation, which is like, what I'm learning is like, by entertaining these conversations of, are you okay? And using the conversation as a way to explore out loud and like real time process whether or not you're okay, I think you can find a lot of clarity. I think you can brainstorm different options and different ideas. And I think it could bring you a whole new sense of direction, or a whole new sense of grounding in where you want to go next, where you want to look next, what you want to simmer on. And, for me, I'm one of those people who like, I have to really sit with things and think about them. And, yes, in many cases, in some cases I can make decisions based off of like a split second gut feeling. But in a lot of cases, I really have to think about things and sleep on them, go for a walk, like really sit with it. And So this first conversation was a really, it sparked all of this thinking for me. I remember after that conversation, for whatever reason, going on Pinterest, and I saw this quote that was like, I'm paraphrasing this. I don't think it exactly said this, but like, it was like the highest responsibility of a friend is to stand guard over one another's solitude. And as soon as I saw that quote, I was like, wow, like that's exactly what just happened in this conversation. And, you know, just knowing that my friend was coming at it from such a genuine place and such a place of like, I want what's best for you. And like, let's get really clear on what that is. After that first conversation, you know, I left feeling like, yeah, I understand theoretically like what he's trying to get across to me. And I understand that, yes, maybe I need to make a change, but I didn't like feel it viscerally in my bones. And I don't think I was in a space yet of wanting it bad enough and or like wanting to move into a better spot enough that was actually going to get me moving. And then we get to a day where I think it was a day when I had a few different anxiety attacks. It was like irregular heartbeat, pain in my chest, just like absolute just anxiety around worry and around what could happen in this dynamic. And my mind was just like spiraling. And I was like, what's going on? Then my face started breaking out. That was my signal to me. That was like the first time my face had broken out since I had cleared my skin. Like broken out in a way where I'm like, this feels like a sign. This isn't supposed to be happening. And so then it's interesting because we had a second, like my friend and I had a second call after that. And I came to him being like, okay, I get it. I get it now. And what I love about this whole like dynamic with this friend is that this conversation has continued over multiple calls. So it's like the first call was one thing. The second call was just me coming and being like, okay, I get it. I'm seeing the signs in my body. Like, whereas maybe before I was seeing them, but I was ignoring them. And here we are. So how do we make a change? And you know, that led to a really just wonderful conversation of, he's like, okay, I'm glad that you see this. And he immediately then went to like, okay, well, what action steps are you going to take? And I loved that he, in the first conversation, he went from witnessing, wanting to understand if I understood the severity or the gravity of the situation. And then in conversation 2, he was holding me accountable and being like, okay, I'm here and I want to see you move beyond this. That led to a really wonderful like brainstorming session of just like how might I move beyond it, and what things am I thinking about, and what can I do in the interim to protect myself? And of course, like the first answer I had to that was like, oh, I'll set boundaries. I'll say no, I'll set boundaries. And he's like, okay, yes, you can set boundaries in the interim, like in the short term, but like this cannot be a long-term solution for you because we've already established the fact that this isn't good. Like this isn't good for your health. And so he made another really interesting point, which is like, because this dynamic is not good for you, when you set boundaries, you're setting those boundaries on a foundation that's already not stable. And right when he said that, I was like, Oh my God. You're so right. Like you know, all of 2024, I was working on boundaries and really getting comfortable and familiar with how to set boundaries. But I had never considered the fact that whilst boundary setting is great, you also have to understand the foundation that you're setting the boundaries on. If the foundation is stable, fantastic. The boundaries hold. But if the foundation is rocky and not stable, then your boundaries aren't going to hold. And the way he said it, I was like, God, this makes perfect sense. I think that sort of wrapped up our conversation, and I left with like more things to chew on. And it's interesting because then we have a third conversation about this, and a couple weeks pass, and I start noticing like more physical and mental symptoms of burnout. And this time I'm really like before the third conversation, I was really noticing like just pure exhaustion. And pure exhaustion when I sit down to do the thing. And it's like, hold on, like 10 minutes ago, I wasn't feeling exhausted, but now I'm feeling so exhausted and unable to like tap into my mental capacities. Like it's like I have so much stuff on my plate. I have all this stuff swirling around me, and I'm in a state of just feeling apathetic to it all. And like, yes, all this stuff is swirling around me, but like it's not like I'm not motivated to tackle it. And it's like the energy source is just pulled out, like the plug is pulled out. And what this also feels like is me just not having access to my creativity. Like I'll be trying to brainstorm something and I'm like, oh my God, I have no ideas. Nothing is coming to mind, which is very unlike me. Like normally brainstorming is like one of my most favorite things to do. And so when I don't feel like I have the capacity to think creatively, that's another huge red flag. Yeah, this exhaustion thing has really been coming up this week. And a lot of the reason why I've been asking myself, like, am I really like burnt out again? Am I teetering on the edge of burnout? And I think about if I'm kind of like on a spectrum, kind of teetering back and forth, either from burnout to not burnout, that if that's the spectrum, what things can I do to pull myself back towards the end of the spectrum that's not feeling burnt out? And I've been thinking about different examples from my life of like how I've done this, because I think there are, especially when it has to do with the mind. The example I go back to a lot is like growing up, I did tumbling, and I was a competitive cheerleader and a competitive dancer. And with tumbling, like it's such a mental thing. And so, I remember one time in high school, well, I went through like a phase in high school where I was on like the competitive cheerleading team, but also I was cheering at football games and basketball games. And at football games, we would be on the track that surrounds the field and we would be cheering there. And anytime the team scored, we would have to do like standing tucks, so standing backflips. And that for the longest time, that was like totally fine for me. Like I could whip it out. I could do several in a row, land all on my feet. But there was this phase where I literally could care less if I landed on my feet. And I remember going into those games and going into like, oh, the team scored. Oh, I got to do a backflip now. Like I remember like bending my knees to go into the backflip and thinking like, oh, I'm not going to land on my feet. And almost just being so apathetic to the fact that like, oh yeah, I'll land on my knees, or oh, I'll face plant. And I remember doing that like over and over and over again. And like most people would be embarrassed to like not land on their feet in front of a crowd. I was like, I could give a fuck. Like it was such an interesting time of like, oh, yep, I'll just talk about how I didn't land on my feet. And oh, yep, she face planted again. Like it was such a weird time. And unlike me, like I couldn't figure out why I couldn't land on my feet. Well, one, I part of it was that I had this mental loop going where it's like, oh yeah, I'm not going to land on my feet. But when I really think about like how I got out of it, because I did get out of that phase. And when we went into basketball season, I remember doing like flips out the wazoo. But yeah, I remember to get out of that phase, I went back to my tumbling coach and I was like, okay, which like I had a separate tumbling coach, like separate, not associated with the school. Like I was going to the gym that I had always gone to. And I remember going to him and just being like, something's off. Like we need to go back to the basics. And that's what we did. Yeah, it was like relearning all the different aspects of the skill. And then he would spot me on the skill over and over and over again, like backflips. And we would do it where we'd also do this exercise where like not only would you do one backflip, you would actually do the backflip in a square. So you would do the backflip facing forward, you would turn to the side, do a backflip, turn to the side again, do a backflip, turn to the side again, do a backflip. And the goal was to land all of them to help build up the stamina for even just landing one flip, and to also build up the confidence of like, okay, if you can land 4 in a row and you're constantly having to reorient yourself after each flip, then if you can do that, you can do one backflip at a football game in front of a crowd, like when you have pom-poms in your hands, etc. So that's what we did, is we went back to the basics. And I've been thinking about that lately because it's like, okay, well, what's that version in my current life? It's like, well, going back to the basics is really focusing on the food I'm eating, making myself really nourishing foods. It's prioritizing exercise. It's doing the exercises that really feel nourishing to me. It's not over exercising, which for me, I used to have a tendency to do that. And there's a specific threshold I reach where it's like, no, this is too much working out. Like I think 3 to 4 times a week is like my sweet spot where I'm like, okay, I feel really good. But anything more than that, I start to feel so exhausted. And so exercise and movement in general is part of, you know, going back to the basics for me. And then also it's like really honoring my time away from work and setting boundaries around work hours. It's like if I'm taking an hour lunch, I'm not working after 5 p.m. I'm, not working super early. I'm like starting my day at a time after I've felt like I've had a chance to ground within myself, whether that's working out, whether that's doing a meditation or a deep imagining, because as I've been mentioning, I do to be magnetic work. The more I pour into my physical body and my mind and give myself space to think and to be and to not do anything, that's when I come back online as like a human being. And so, and I learned that in taking, 18 months off of work to recover from burnout. So that's what I've been thinking a lot about. And actually, it's so interesting because I had this week I was doing deep imagining. It's like part of To Be Magnetic work. And I had this really interesting visual come forward, and I'll share it here because I think it gives a lot of context, and I think it's such a powerful visual of what was coming forward as I was in like the subconscious state. This image just came forward of there's 2 trampolines. I'm bouncing on both trampolines. So like there's one version of me bouncing on this trampoline, another version of me bouncing on the other trampoline. And let's say the trampoline on the left, I was bouncing on it, but there was a glass ceiling. And so every time I would try and bounce higher and higher, but I constantly hit the glass ceiling. And what that glass ceiling really represents is like burnout and not being able to move past that. And so that was on the left-hand side. Now, if we go to the right-hand side, there was another version of me jumping on this trampoline, but there was no glass ceiling. And it was one of those like super powerful, like power tumbling trampolines where you can really get high. And there was no glass ceiling. So I was just jumping so high. And when I think about, what that really means in the context of my life, and this kind of goes back to, there have been other cases where people have asked me if I'm okay. And they haven't been people who are close friends. And so or people who I felt like I could really open up to about this. But it's interesting because when those people asked me if I was okay was at a time when this sort of sensation of this trampoline visual was happening. Like truly, I viscerally felt it in my life, where it's like the burnout, the environment I'm in that's causing burnout versus the other trampoline where I'm just flying so high. The other trampoline and what I'm doing on the other trampoline and what's associated with that is my podcast. And when I think, back to the time of other people asking me if I was okay, it's when, and this would have been several months ago, but like early to mid 2024, where it's like people were coming to me asking if I was okay. They could sense that I was not okay. And at the time, what I was feeling was just such a sense of, I was getting these intuitive nudges that said go on my podcast. Just the word go, like very strongly related to my podcast. But I didn't have the clarity yet, and I didn't have the mental space or capacity to gather that clarity. I was feeling this push of go. Create this podcast, put it out in the world, just do it. While also, it was almost like the trampoline where there's no glass ceiling and jumping high. I'm like getting the push to go jump on that trampoline with your podcast. There's no burnout there, just go. And versus, so I was getting that nudge while also having to still be in the environment that is the trampoline that's like has the glass ceiling and it's burnout. And that was creating a lot of like inner turmoil for me. And it was at a point where I didn't really know how to talk about that because, again, the idea at that time, the idea for the podcast was so half-baked. Like, I deeply knew that I needed to start it, but I think I only had the name of it at that point, Secret Garden. Like, I had no other clarity. So, of course, that created a lot of inner turmoil, and it was coming out energetically, even though I wasn't saying it, still keeping my cool, calm, and collected exterior. But like people were definitely picking up on it, and I wasn't in a space to kind of share. But, as time has passed and as I've been, by the time you're seeing this episode, like the podcast will absolutely be out and will have been out for weeks. But I am getting myself onto the trampoline that's, has no glass ceiling of burnout. But it's interesting. So I share that because I went into the third conversation with my friend just almost saying exactly that, although I didn't share the visual of the trampoline. I don't know that I had that visual come through yet in my own mind. But what I said to him was like, okay, here are all the things I'm doing to make myself feel better. Yes, I recognize that I feel an incredible sense of exhaustion in the current dynamic that I'm in, but I also want you to know that I'm doing this thing that really energizes me and really is lighting me up, and I'm loving every single thing that I'm doing related to this. And so just know that that still exists. And also, I haven't forgotten about the fact that I do deserve a better dynamic, and it's okay to move through that. Like, I'm actively moving through that. And, I think it just brought him so much joy to like hear what was exciting me. And I think, he felt a sense of ease like in the conversation, but, it was a really nice moment. And I think I've just appreciated so much like how the vibe through all of this is like, he's coming to me energetically and basically saying, I want what's best for you. And I know, and that this is not what's best for you. We both know you deserve better. And so how are you going to get there? And just holding me accountable and wanting to see me get to the other side. And so I think, as we go through these like really turbulent feelings or times of feeling like things are out of our control, or you want to get out of a situation, but you don't know the way out yet. I think it's so helpful to have conversations with friends like this, because you can just process your feelings in real time. I think sometimes it helps saying things out loud and being like, oh, that feels good, or that something about that doesn't feel right. Like, these types of conversations are so helpful to have with friends, and specifically friends who they aren't trying to fix the situation for you. They aren't coming with a bunch of solutions. They're coming from a place of witnessing, wanting to listen to you, wanting you to find your own solution, and almost like creating a space where you have to start exploring what those solutions could be. And I think it's such a unique approach. I honestly haven't, it's a genius approach. It's a fantastic approach. I haven't come across anyone who's like as good at doing that as he is. And so that's why I really wanted to share that today. But I think there's something so powerful about creating an environment where somebody can feel like they can start to explore the solutions that they might be able to come up with for themselves. And so I just want to leave you with that as you're kind of navigating whatever's coming up in your life. I just encourage you to lean on friends around you. And if you're the friend that somebody else is leaning on, like, how can you create that space where they can start to brainstorm solutions for themselves, and you're not coming from it from a place of judgment. You're more so coming from it of like I see you and you deserve better, and what might better look like for you, and how might you get there, and just seeing what they have to say. And I think even through a lot of that, it's like, yeah, I think all you have to do is just listen, because the other person knows deep down what they need to do. They just need to bring their awareness to that. But just know that you're going to be okay. sink into the connections around you, to process feelings, to process really tricky situations that you might be in or dynamics that don't feel quite right. And yeah, thank you so much for your listening ear, and I'll see you next week. Bye.